On a freezing winter night, a single father, exhausted after 2 back-to-back shifts, was jolted awake by the urgent ring of the doorbell. To his surprise, an elderly woman, soaked and shivering, stood outside, lost while searching for her daughter's home. Despite fearing trouble, he took her in and gave her a warm place to stay. What he didn't know was that her daughter was a wealthy CEO, and his little girl's lives were about to change forever. Before we dive in, what time are you listening? Where are you from? Drop a comment below and tell me. The winter wind howled through the narrow streets of Detroit's east side, carrying snowflakes that danced like ghosts under the flickering streetlights. Inside apartment 2B of the weathered brick complex on Gratiot Avenue, Marcus Johnson lay sprawled across his twin mattress, one arm dangling over the edge where he'd finally collapsed after his double shift at the diner and his overnight security gig. The digital clock on his nightstand glowed a harsh red 2:17 a.m. Ring, ring, ring. The doorbell's shrill cry cut through the silence like a knife through fabric, jolting Marcus from his exhausted slumber. His eyes snapped open, pupils dilating in the darkness as his heart hammered against his ribcage. Nobody rang doorbells at this hour unless something was terribly wrong. His mind raced through possibilities. Police with bad news, angry neighbors, or worse, someone looking for trouble with a black man living alone with his daughter. Ring, ring, ring. The persistent sound echoed again, more urgent this time. Marcus rolled over and glanced toward the small alcove where 4-year-old Zoe slept peacefully in her toddler bed, her tiny chest rising and falling beneath her favorite purple blanket. Her dark curls framed her innocent face as she clutched her worn teddy bear, completely oblivious to the intrusion that had shattered their quiet night. Marcus swung his legs over the side of the bed, his bare feet touching the cold linoleum floor. The chill shot up his spine as he grabbed his Detroit Lions hoodie from the chair beside his bed and pulled it over his white undershirt. His hands trembled slightly, not from the cold but from the adrenaline coursing through his veins. In this neighborhood, unexpected visitors at 2 a.m. rarely brought good news. Ring, ring, Jesus, Marcus whispered under his breath, running his hand over his close-cropped hair. He padded across the small living room, stepping carefully around Zoe's scattered toys and coloring books that littered the carpet. The apartment felt smaller in the darkness, the walls seeming to close in around him as he approached the front door. Through the peephole, Marcus saw a sight that made his breath catch in his throat. An elderly white woman stood on his doorstep, her silver hair disheveled and damp from the falling snow. She wore a thin floral nightgown beneath an old winter coat that hung open, revealing her frail frame shivering violently in the bitter December air. Her weathered hands clutched a small black purse against her chest as she swayed unsteadily on her feet. Marcus felt his stomach tighten. This wasn't what he'd expected, not a threat, but something far more complicated. The woman looked lost, confused, vulnerable. Her pale blue eyes stared blankly at his door as if she couldn't quite remember why she was there. Ring, ring, ring. She pressed the doorbell again with a shaky finger, her lips moving silently as if she were having a conversation with someone only she could see. Marcus watched through the peephole, his mind racing. Every instinct screamed at him to be cautious. He was a single black father in a rough neighborhood, and inviting a confused white stranger into his home at 2 a.m. could lead to misunderstandings that might destroy his life. But God help him, he couldn't just leave her out there to freeze. Marcus's hand hovered over the deadbolt, his jaw clenched tight. He thought about his daughter sleeping soundly just 20 feet away, about the responsibilities that weighed on his shoulders every single day. One wrong move, one misunderstanding, and Child Protective Services could be at his door. The police could be called, his carefully constructed life could crumble in an instant. Yet when he looked at the woman again, all he saw was someone's grandmother, lost and afraid in the middle of a Detroit winter night. With a deep breath that felt like surrender, Marcus slowly turned the deadbolt and opened the door. The frigid air rushed into his apartment, carrying with it the scent of snow and desperation. "Ma'am?" Marcus's voice came out rougher than he intended, thick with sleep and uncertainty. "Ma'am, are you all right?" The elderly woman looked up at him with eyes that seemed to focus and unfocus like a camera struggling to find its target. Her lips were tinged blue with cold, and when she spoke, her voice was barely above a whisper. "Tommy," she said, tilting her head to the side like a confused bird. "Tommy, why won't you let me in? I've been waiting out here for so long, and it's so cold, sweetheart. I just want to come home." Marcus felt his heart crack a little at the vulnerability in her voice. She thought he was someone else, someone she trusted, someone she loved. The confusion in her eyes spoke of something deeper than simple disorientation. This woman was lost in more ways than one. "Ma'am, I think you might have the wrong house," Marcus said gently, stepping slightly outside, despite the cold biting at his bare arms. "I'm not Tommy. Are you looking for someone specific? Maybe I can help you find them." The woman blinked slowly, her brow furrowing as she studied his face. For a moment, clarity seemed to flicker in her eyes like a candle flame in the wind. "I don't know," she whispered, her voice breaking. "I don't know where I am. I was supposed to, there was somewhere I needed to go, but I can't remember." She trailed off, looking around at the unfamiliar street, as if seeing it for the first time. Marcus felt the last of his resistance crumble. Whatever danger this might bring, whatever complications might arise, he couldn't leave this woman standing in the snow. His grandmother would roll over in her grave if she knew he turned away someone in need, regardless of the color of their skin or the hour of the night. "Ma'am, why don't you come inside where it's warm?" Marcus said, stepping back and opening the door wider. "You're gonna freeze to death out here, and that's not gonna help anybody." The woman's face lit up with relief and gratitude that made Marcus's chest tighten. She shuffled forward on unsteady legs, and he gently took her elbow to guide her into his small living room. Her skin felt like ice through the thin fabric of her coat. "Thank you, Tommy," she whispered, patting his arm with a trembling hand. "You're such a good boy. Your mother raised you right." Marcus closed the door behind them, turning the deadbolt with a soft click that seemed to echo through the quiet apartment. He'd crossed a line now, made a choice that couldn't be undone. Whatever came next, he'd have to face it head-on. The first pale rays of December sunlight crept through the thin curtains of Marcus's apartment, casting long shadows across the cramped living room where the elderly woman slept curled beneath his thickest blanket on the worn fabric sofa. Her breathing came in soft, steady rhythms, and for the first time since she'd appeared at his door, her face looked peaceful. The alarm on his phone buzzed insistently at 6:45 a.m., and Marcus silenced it quickly, his joints protesting as he stood up from the uncomfortable chair. His neck felt like someone had tied it in knots, and his lower back ached from the awkward sleeping position. Marcus moved quietly to the small kitchenette, his bare feet making soft padding sounds on the linoleum floor. He needed to be at the auto parts store by 8 a.m. for his morning shift, then rush across town to Metro Diner for the lunch rush. The routine was exhausting, but the two jobs barely kept food on the table and the rent paid. Missing even one shift meant choosing between groceries and utilities. "Tommy?" The elderly woman's voice drifted from the living room, groggy with sleep and confusion. "Tommy, is that you making breakfast, sweetheart?" Marcus froze with his hand on the coffee maker, his stomach clenching with the familiar weight of responsibility. He turned to see the woman sitting up on the sofa, her silver hair sticking up at odd angles and her pale blue eyes scanning the unfamiliar surroundings with growing bewilderment. "Good morning, ma'am," Marcus said softly, approaching the living room with careful steps. "You're in my apartment. You came by last night, remember? You were cold and lost." The woman blinked slowly, her weathered hands smoothing down her rumpled nightgown beneath the blanket, her gaze fixed on Marcus's face with an intensity that made him shift uncomfortably. "You look just like him," she whispered, a sad smile creeping across her lips. "My Tommy, he's about your age now, you know. Such a handsome young man, just like his father." She paused, her expression growing distant. "Though I haven't seen him in how long has it been?" Before Marcus could respond, the sound of small feet pattering across the floor drew their attention. Zoe emerged from the bedroom alcove, her purple pajamas wrinkled from sleep, and her dark curls forming a wild halo around her head. She clutched her teddy bear against her chest, and stared at the stranger on their sofa with wide, curious eyes. "Daddy?" Zoe's voice was small and uncertain. "Who's the lady?" The elderly woman's face transformed completely at the sight of the little girl. Her confusion seemed to melt away, replaced by pure joy and wonder. She clasped her hands together against her heart, her eyes filling with tears. "Oh my goodness," she breathed, her voice trembling with emotion. "What a beautiful little angel. Come here, sweetheart. Come to Grandma Eleanor." Zoe looked up at her father questioningly, her thumb finding its way to her mouth, a habit she only displayed when she felt uncertain. Marcus knelt down to his daughter's level, gently removing her thumb and smoothing her unruly curls. "This is Miss Eleanor, baby girl," Marcus explained, his voice tender but tired. "She got lost last night, and she needed somewhere safe to stay. Remember what Daddy always tells you about helping people when they're in trouble?" Zoe nodded solemnly, her 4-year-old mind processing this information with the seriousness she reserved for her father's most important lessons. She approached Eleanor cautiously, still clutching her teddy bear like a shield. "Are you sad because you're lost?" Zoe asked, tilting her head to one side. "When I get lost in the store, Daddy always finds me. Maybe he can help you find your family too." Eleanor's tears spilled over, streaming down her cheeks as she reached out to touch Zoe's soft cheek. "You're such a sweet child," she whispered. "Just like my granddaughter used to be. She had curls just like yours, so pretty and wild." Marcus pulled out his worn leather wallet and counted the bills inside with growing dread. 2 20s, a 5 and 2 crumpled singles, $47 to last until his next paycheck on Friday. 3 days away, it would have to cover gas, groceries and anything else that came up. His stomach twisted with familiar anxiety. "Daddy? Miss Eleanor says she likes pancakes," Zoe announced, skipping into the kitchen with Eleanor following close behind. "Can we make pancakes for breakfast?" Eleanor moved slowly, one hand trailing along the wall for support, but her eyes were bright with the simple pleasure of interacting with the little girl. She wore Marcus's spare bathrobe over her nightgown, and despite her confusion, there was something dignified about the way she carried herself. Marcus opened the nearly empty refrigerator and stared at its meager contents: a half-gallon of milk that would expire tomorrow, 2 eggs, and a container of leftover takeout from 3 days ago that probably wasn't safe to eat anymore. The pancake mix in the cabinet would require ingredients he didn't have. "How about we go out for breakfast instead?" Marcus said, forcing cheerfulness into his voice for his daughter's benefit. "We can go to the diner where Daddy works. You like their chocolate chip pancakes, remember?" Zoe clapped her hands together with excitement, and Eleanor smiled warmly at the suggestion. Neither of them understood what this decision cost him. Not just the money he didn't have, but the shift he'd have to work later with Eleanor and Zoe in tow, hoping his manager would understand the impossible situation he'd found himself in. The Metro diner buzzed with the familiar chaos of the lunch rush, the air thick with the aroma of grilled onions, sizzling bacon, and fresh coffee that had been brewing since dawn. Marcus pushed through the glass entrance doors, holding them open for Eleanor and Zoe, who followed close behind him like ducklings trailing their mother. The familiar sounds and smells of the diner wrapped around him like a warm blanket. This was his second home, the place where he spent more waking hours than anywhere else. But today felt different, weighted with the responsibility of the 2 people depending on him. "Table for 3, asked Marla, the hostess, her penciled eyebrows raised in surprise at seeing Marcus with company during his shift day. She grabbed 3 menus from the stack, her gum snapping loudly as she looked between the elderly white woman and the little black girl with obvious curiosity. "Actually, Marla, they're gonna sit in booth 7 while I work my shift," Marcus said, nodding toward the corner booth that offered the best view of the kitchen and register. "I'll take care of them myself." Eleanor moved slowly across the diner, her hand trailing along booth backs for support, while Zoe skipped ahead, her eyes wide with excitement at being in Daddy's workplace. The elderly woman slid carefully into the worn vinyl seat, smoothing down the borrowed skirt Marcus had found in a bag of clothes meant for donation. Despite the mismatched outfit, she carried herself with quiet dignity, her back straight and her hands folded properly in her lap. "This is where you work, Daddy." Zoe climbed into the booth across from Eleanor, kneeling on the seat so she could see over the table. "It smells really good in here, like when you come home and your clothes smell like hamburgers." Marcus felt his chest tighten with a mixture of pride and embarrassment. This place represented both his determination to provide for his daughter and the harsh reality that 2 jobs still barely kept them afloat. He disappeared into the employee break room and emerged moments later wearing his uniform, A burgundy polo shirt with Metro Diner embroidered in yellow thread and black slacks that had been washed so many times they'd faded to charcoal gray. "Okay ladies," Marcus said, sliding into the booth beside Zoe and spreading the menus across the table. "What sounds good for lunch?" Eleanor studied the laminated menu with intense concentration, her fingers tracing the words as if she were reading a foreign language. Occasionally, her face would light up with recognition, and she'd point to an item with childlike enthusiasm. "Oh, chocolate chip pancakes," she said, her voice warm with memory. "I used to make those for my daughter when she was little. Catherine loved them with extra syrup, just drowning in it." She paused, her brow furrowing as if trying to catch a thought that kept slipping away. "She lives around here somewhere, you know. That's why I came to Detroit, to visit Catherine. But I can't quite remember her address." Marcus felt a flicker of hope pierce through his worry. If Eleanor had family in the area, maybe this situation could be resolved without involving authorities or social services. Maybe he could help reunite them without drawing unwanted attention to his own circumstances. "Do you remember Catherine's last name?" Marcus asked gently. "Or where she works? Maybe we can help you find her." Eleanor's eyes grew distant, staring past the bustling diner as if searching through fog. "Williams, Catherine Williams. She's successful, my daughter. Always was the smart one. Got herself a big job with computers or something modern like that." She shook her head slowly. "But the neighborhood keeps changing, and I got confused about which bus to take." Zoe reached across the table and patted Eleanor's weathered hand with her small fingers. "It's okay, Miss Eleanor. Sometimes I get confused too. Like when Daddy takes me to the big grocery store and all the aisles look the same." The simple gesture brought tears to Eleanor's eyes, and she turned her hand palm up to hold Zoe's tiny fingers. "You're such a sweet girl. You remind me of Catherine when she was your age. Always trying to make everyone feel better." Marcus pulled out his wallet and stared at the $47 for the third time that morning, calculating and recalculating what he could afford. 3 breakfast combos would cost $42 with tax, leaving him with $5 until Friday. No gas money, no groceries, no emergency fund. But looking at Zoe's excited face and Eleanor's grateful smile, he knew the math didn't matter. 3 chocolate chip pancake platters, Marcus announced, closing the menu with finality. "With extra syrup, just like Catherine used to like them." Jose Martinez emerged from the kitchen carrying a fresh pot of coffee, his dark eyes immediately focusing on the unusual trio in booth 7. He'd worked alongside Marcus for 2 years, sharing the exhaustion of double shifts and the struggle of supporting families on diner wages. The question in his expression was obvious even before he approached their table. "Marcus, man, what's going on?" Jose asked in a low voice, refilling their coffee cups while keeping his tone friendly for the customer's benefit. "You called out this morning, and now you're here with family." "Long story, hermano," Marcus replied quietly, standing up to walk Jose toward the coffee station where they could speak more privately. "The lady got lost last night, showed up at my apartment confused. She's got family somewhere in the city, but until I can track them down, I'm not leaving her on the street." Jose's expression shifted from curiosity to understanding, then to concern. He'd grown up in neighborhoods where helping strangers could be dangerous, where good intentions sometimes led to bad consequences. But he'd also seen Marcus's character, witnessed the way he sacrificed for Zoe, worked extra shifts for coworkers with sick kids, never complained about the hardest tables or the longest hours. "You sure about this, brother?" Jose asked, glancing back at the booth where Eleanor was teaching Zoe to fold her napkin into animal shapes. "I mean, I get wanting to help, but you got your own situation to worry about." "I couldn't leave her out there, Jose. She's somebody's grandmother." Marcus watched as Zoe clapped her hands delightedly at Eleanor's napkin swan, both of them laughing like they'd known each other for years instead of hours. "Besides, Zoe's never had a grandma figure. Look at her, she's happier than I've seen her in months." When Marcus returned to the booth with their food, the transformation was remarkable. Eleanor had combed her silver hair with her fingers and seemed more alert, more present. She cut Zoe's pancakes into perfect bite-sized pieces while telling her stories about a little girl named Catherine who used to steal extra chocolate chips from the batter. "These are the best pancakes ever," Zoe declared, syrup coating her chin as she grinned at both adults. "Miss Eleanor, Will you come have breakfast with us again tomorrow? Eleanor's face glowed with simple joy as she wiped syrup from Zoe's face with a napkin. I'd love that, sweetheart, though I suppose I should call Catherine first. She's probably worried about her old mother wandering around the city. Marcus slid his $47 across the table to cover their bill, watching the last of his money disappear with a mixture of anxiety and strange peace. The lunch crowd showed no signs of slowing, and every completed order meant another few dollars in tips that he desperately needed to stretch until Friday. The small television mounted in the corner of the kitchen droned on with its usual afternoon programming, soap operas, game shows, and local news updates that provided background noise for the organized chaos of food service. Marcus rarely paid attention to the screen, too focused on keeping orders flowing and avoiding the sharp criticism of Danny, the head cook who treated the kitchen like his personal kingdom. Marcus, you need to move faster on those fries, Danny barked from his position at the main grill, sweat beading on his forehead beneath his grease-stained baseball cap. Table 9's been waiting 15 minutes and they're starting to complain. Coming right up, Marcus replied, shaking a fresh basket of frozen potatoes into the bubbling oil. He glanced through the kitchen's pass-through window toward booth 7, where Eleanor was showing Zoe how to make shadow puppets on the wall with the afternoon sunlight streaming through the windows. The sight of his daughter's delighted laughter momentarily eased the knot of anxiety that had been tightening in his chest since morning. The television's volume suddenly increased as the local news transitioned to a special bulletin, the serious tone of the anchor cutting through the kitchen noise like a knife through butter. Detroit police are asking for the public's help in locating Eleanor Williams, a 75-year-old woman who was reported missing yesterday evening from her daughter's residence in Bloomfield Hills, the news anchor announced with professional concern. Mrs. Williams suffers from early-stage dementia and was last seen wearing a floral nightgown and dark blue winter coat. Her family is extremely worried about her welfare, especially given the current frigid temperatures. The photograph on the screen showed Eleanor exactly as she appeared now, sitting in booth 7 and carefully cutting Zoe's remaining pancakes into perfect triangles. Marcus felt his hands begin to shake as the reporter continued with details about Eleanor's disappearance, her confused mental state, and the desperate search that had been ongoing for nearly 24 hours. Anyone with information about Mrs. Williams' whereabouts is urged to contact Detroit police immediately at the number on your screen, the anchor concluded. The family is offering a substantial reward for her safe return. Marcus stared at the phone number flashing across the bottom of the television screen, his mind racing with implications he hadn't considered. Eleanor wasn't just lost, she was a missing person. Her family was searching for her, probably filing reports and organizing search parties. Every moment he delayed returning her could be seen as something more sinister than simple kindness. Jose appeared beside him, following Marcus's gaze to the television screen with growing understanding. Dios mío, he whispered under his breath. That's her, isn't it? The lady with your daughter. I need to use your phone, Marcus said urgently, pulling off his apron and tossing it onto the prep counter. His hands fumbled with the ties, his fingers suddenly clumsy with adrenaline and panic. I have to call that number right now. Jose handed him his cell phone without question, watching as Marcus dialed the police number with trembling fingers. The phone rang once, twice, 3 times before rolling to an automated voicemail system that asked him to leave detailed information about his sighting. Marcus hung up immediately and tried again, getting the same result. No answer, Marcus said, his voice tight with frustration. He tried the number a 3rd time, then a 4th, each attempt ending in the same computerized message. Jesus, how can they not answer when they're asking for help finding her? Through the pass-through window, Marcus could see Eleanor holding Zoe's small hands across the table, both of them giggling at some shared joke. Neither of them had any idea that their peaceful afternoon was about to be shattered by the harsh reality of Marcus's impossible situation. Listen, hermano, Jose said quietly, moving closer so the other kitchen staff couldn't overhear. Maybe you should just take her there yourself. The address was on the news, Bloomfield Hills. Her family's probably going crazy with worry. Marcus felt his stomach drop as he realized Jose was right. Waiting for police to return his calls could take hours, and every minute that passed made his situation more complicated. He needed to get Eleanor home immediately, before anyone could question his motives or his 24-hour delay in reporting her presence. I need to borrow some money for a taxi, Marcus said, the words coming out in a rush. $25, maybe 30. I'll pay you back Friday when I get my check, I promise. Jose's expression shifted to concern as he processed what Marcus was asking. $30 was half a day's tips for either of them, money that Jose probably needed for his own family's expenses. But he reached into his pocket without hesitation, pulling out a crumpled collection of bills and counting out $25. You sure about this, man? Jose asked, pressing the money into Marcus's palm. Maybe you should just call the police, let them handle it. This could look bad for you, you know. A black man keeping a missing white lady overnight. I can't leave Zoe here alone, but I can't take her with me either, Marcus said, his mind working through the logistics of his impossible situation. Could you watch her for a couple hours, just until I get back from dropping Eleanor off? Jose glanced toward the dining room where Zoe was now coloring on napkins while Eleanor supervised with grandmother-like attention. The request clearly made him uncomfortable. Watching someone else's child during a work shift was asking a lot, even from a friend. Marcus, if something goes wrong, Jose began, then stopped himself as he saw the desperation in Marcus's eyes. Okay, hermano. Okay, but you better get back here before Danny notices you're gone, or we're both in trouble. Marcus gripped Jose's shoulder with genuine gratitude, feeling the weight of friendship and trust that transcended language and cultural differences. I owe you, brother, more than money, I owe you. As Marcus walked toward booth 7 to collect Eleanor, his legs felt unsteady beneath him. He was about to take the biggest risk of his life, leaving his daughter with a coworker while he transported a missing person across the city in a taxi he couldn't afford. But looking at Eleanor's confused, trusting face and remembering the way she'd called him Tommy in the snow, he knew there was no other choice that his conscience could live with. The afternoon sun cast long shadows across Marcus's small apartment as he sat at the kitchen table, staring at the $4.64 scattered before him, all that remained of his money after yesterday's taxi ride to Bloomfield Hills. His shift at the diner had been awkward and tense after returning to find Danny furious about his unexplained absence, and Marcus knew his job hung by a thread thinner than tissue paper. Zoe played quietly on the living room floor, building elaborate towers with her blocks while humming a tune Eleanor had taught her during their brief time together. The gentle knock at the front door made Marcus's stomach clench with familiar anxiety. Landlords, bill collectors and social workers all knocked with that same measured politeness that preceded bad news. He approached the door cautiously, peering through the peephole to see two figures standing in the hallway, one familiar, one completely unexpected. Eleanor Williams stood in the corridor, wearing a cream-colored wool coat and matching scarf, her silver hair neatly styled and her posture confident in a way Marcus had never seen before. The confusion and disorientation that had clouded her eyes for the past day had lifted completely, replaced by sharp intelligence and warm recognition. Beside her stood a woman in her early 40s, impeccably dressed in a charcoal business suit that probably cost more than Marcus made in 3 months. Marcus opened the door slowly, his heart hammering against his ribs as Eleanor's face lit up with genuine joy at seeing him again. "Tommy," Eleanor exclaimed, then caught herself with a soft laugh that carried no embarrassment. "I'm sorry, Marcus, I remember everything clearly now. You must think I'm a foolish old woman, getting so confused and calling you by my son's name." "Mrs. Williams," Marcus said, relief flooding through him at seeing her safe and clearly in her right mind. "I'm so glad you're okay. I was worried about you all day." The woman beside Eleanor stepped forward with a professional smile that didn't quite reach her eyes. She extended a manicured hand toward Marcus, her grip firm and assessing when he shook it. "Mr. Johnson, I'm Catherine Williams, Eleanor's daughter," she said, her voice carrying the polished confidence of someone accustomed to boardrooms and power lunches. "I cannot begin to express how grateful I am for what you did for my mother. When she told me about your kindness," Catherine's voice trailed off as Zoe appeared beside Marcus, pressing herself against his leg while staring up at the visitors with curious brown eyes. Eleanor immediately knelt down to Zoe's level, her face transforming with grandmother-like warmth as she opened her arms. "There's my little artist," Eleanor said softly, and Zoe ran into her embrace without hesitation. "I brought you something, sweetheart. I hope your daddy says it's okay." From her purse, Eleanor produced a small wooden jewelry box painted with delicate flowers. When she opened it, a tiny ballerina spun to the melody of Fur Elise, and Zoe gasped with delight that made both women smile. It was mine when I was about your age, Eleanor explained, placing the music box carefully in Zoe's small hands. Every little girl should have something beautiful that's just hers. Marcus felt his throat tighten as he watched his daughter's face glow with wonder. He'd never been able to afford anything so lovely for her, nothing that wasn't practical or necessary for basic survival. Mrs. Williams, you didn't need to do that, Marcus said quietly. Taking care of your mother was the right thing to do. Catherine studied Marcus with new interest, her business-sharp gaze taking in his worn clothing, the sparse apartment visible behind him, and the obvious love between father and daughter. She exchanged a meaningful look with her mother before speaking again. Marcus, may we come in? I'd like to hear the whole story from the beginning, if you don't mind. Mother's told me some of it, but I suspect there are details she's left out. They settled in the small living room. Catherine perched carefully on the edge of the sofa while Eleanor made herself comfortable beside Zoe on the floor, immediately engaging with the block towers and stuffed animals. Marcus remained standing, uncomfortable with having someone of Catherine's obvious wealth and status in his modest home. Mother told me she was trying to visit me Tuesday night, Catherine began, her tone businesslike but not unkind. She took the bus from her assisted living facility, but got confused about which stop was mine. When she saw your apartment number, 2B, she thought it was my address on Bloomfield Boulevard. The numbers confused her. Eleanor nodded from the floor, where she was helping Zoe arrange her blocks into a castle. I was so certain I'd found Catherine's house. And when you opened the door, Marcus, you looked so much like my son Thomas that everything just seemed right. My mind filled in the gaps with what I wanted to see. She told me how you took her in without question, Catherine continued, her voice growing warmer. How you gave up your own bed, shared your last meal, spent money you couldn't afford to make sure she was comfortable. And then when you realized she was missing, you brought her home immediately, no questions asked. Marcus shifted uncomfortably, not used to being praised for actions that had felt like simple human decency. Anyone would have done the same thing. No, Catherine said firmly, standing up and walking to the window that overlooked the parking lot filled with old cars and empty beer bottles. Most people would have called the police immediately, or turned her away, or found a dozen reasons why helping wasn't their responsibility. You put yourself at risk to help a stranger. She turned back to face Marcus, her expression serious and thoughtful. Marcus, what do you do for work? I work at Metro Diner and Johnson Auto Parts, Marcus replied, wondering where this conversation was heading. 2 part-time jobs mostly. It keeps food on the table. What's your education background? Marcus felt heat creep up his neck, embarrassed by his lack of formal qualifications. High school diploma, some community college, but I had to drop out when Zoe was born. Her mother, well, it's just been me and Zoe since she was 6 months old. Catherine nodded thoughtfully, then reached into her briefcase and pulled out a business card. Marcus read it with growing amazement. Catherine Williams, CEO, Tech Forward Solutions. I run a technology consulting company, Catherine explained. We're opening a new branch here in Detroit, focusing on helping local businesses modernize their operations. I need someone to manage that branch, someone with integrity, someone who understands this community, someone who puts people first. Marcus stared at her, certain he'd misunderstood. Ma'am, I appreciate the thought, but I don't know anything about technology or business management. Those things can be taught, Catherine said, her voice growing more animated. What can't be taught is character. What can't be taught is the kind of person who spends his last $47 to feed a confused stranger and his own child. What can't be taught is someone who sacrifices his job to do the right thing. Eleanor looked up from the floor, her eyes bright with unshed tears. Marcus, you gave me more than just shelter that night. You gave me dignity. You treated me like family when you had every reason to be suspicious or afraid. Catherine pulled a folder from her briefcase and set it on the coffee table. The starting salary is $65,000 a year, with full benefits and opportunities for advancement. There's a training program, mentorship, everything you'd need to succeed. All I need to know is whether you're interested. Marcus felt the room spinning around him, the numbers refusing to make sense in his head. $65,000 was more than he'd made in the past 2 years combined. It was Zoe's college fund, security, a future he'd never dared to imagine. Why, he whispered, his voice barely audible above Zoe's happy chatter as she and Eleanor built their block castle. Why would you do this for me? Catherine's professional demeanor softened completely, revealing the daughter who'd spent 24 hours terrified that her mother was dead in a Detroit snowbank. Because when my mother was lost and vulnerable, you didn't see a burden or a problem to be solved. You saw someone who needed help, and you helped her. In a world where people walk past each other in crisis, you stopped, you cared. That's the kind of person I want representing my company. 6 months later, Marcus stood in the gleaming office of Tech Forward Solutions' Detroit branch, wearing a suit that actually fit and reviewing reports from the team he now supervised. Through his office window, he could see the playground of Zoe's new school, where she was learning violin and French and making friends with children whose parents weren't counting pennies at the grocery store. Eleanor visited every Sunday, bringing homemade cookies and stories that made Zoe laugh until her sides hurt. She'd become the grandmother Zoe had never known, and Zoe had become the granddaughter Eleanor treasured. Marcus often watched them together, remembering that snowy December night when a stranger's doorbell had changed everything. Sometimes, Marcus reflected as he finished his reports and prepared to pick up Zoe from her after-school program. The smallest acts of kindness created the largest miracles. He'd learned that helping others wasn't about what you could afford to give, it was about what you couldn't afford not to give. And in giving Eleanor shelter for one night, he'd somehow found shelter for himself and his daughter that would last a lifetime. The winter snow had melted into spring, but the warmth that had begun with a midnight doorbell continued to grow, proving that sometimes the most unexpected interruptions become the most precious gifts of all.
Join us to share meaningful stories by hitting the like and subscribe buttons. Don't forget to turn on the notification bell to start your day with profound lessons and heartfelt empathy.